Sega Genesis 1995. While Super Nintendo is still doing very well, the NES is no longer even in production anymore. They're not making any new games for the NES. And although you could feel Sega doing something new soon, there's teases about it in magazines, and the 32X came out at the end of '94. Still, a lot of games came out for the Sega Genesis in 1995. How are you feeling? You got John Riggs here, checking out some of the games that came out for the Sega Genesis in 1995. Maybe some games you completely forgot about. Or maybe even some games that you never knew existed. And I'm allowed to look at each video's analytics to find out who subscribes per video. So if this is the first time you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button because it allows me to see, ooh, there's people subscribing because of this video, I better do more videos just like this. That's how that works. And simply by watching, you're supporting. But I do also make my own homebrews that you can purchase today. This is called Choo Choo Mimic. Love this game. I also make custom air fresheners like this one that smells like styrofoam and static. I mean, smells like it now because it's still sealed, but you know, this one's a popular one. Check out my shop in the description below, thanks. Going through this list chronologically, early in the year we had the death and return of Superman. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up with Superman. All these great ideas that you could do with a Superman game, and so many of them just kind of fall short on like, it's Superman, you should just be able to breeze through the game, no Game Genie needed.
Game over? No way! Because we got Game Genie!
But they have to do some things to make it kind of semi-playable, but it's an okay side-scrolling beat-em-up, and you got your little laser shooter, that's your special move, you can shoot lasers out of your eyes. You do have a, like, where you fly up and then fly back down and crash the screen, that's like your weapon crash kind of thing. I mean, that's alright too. But, I mean, it's fine. Demolition Man, one of my favorite movies for the time. It's a run and gun. It's fine. It's good. I love the movie. I wish there was more references from the movie in this. I mean, not that I'm expecting, like, the Taco Bell stage or anything like that, but, I mean, it was alright. And you'll quickly realize that a lot of the games that came out for the Genesis in 1995, yeah, they're alright. Justice League Task Force. Already got another game with Superman in it. Yeah, it's alright. It's... I hate to keep doing that. It's a two-player versus fighting game from Blizzard, I believe. I liked this game okay. I mean, Street Fighter clones were still very popular, and you're going to see a lot of them on this list. But the fact that you could play as the other DC characters like Flash, like Aquaman, this was 1995, so everybody had a mullet. It's just, it was good. The Adventures of Mighty Max came out tied to the cartoon, I think. I remember there being like a Mighty Max cartoon as well. I remember this game, you move faster than I wanted to, or you jump quicker than you should. Like you super high jumps, but it's very fast, and that kind of prevented me from playing it a whole lot. But The Adventures of Mighty Max, I remember the label for sure more than anything, just like the box art. I was like, oh, there's that thing. Desert Demolition, man, what a fun game. I wish this was one of those games that I wish more people would talk about. Desert Demolition for the Sega Genesis. You play as Wile E. Coyote with the Roadrunner stuff from Looney Tunes. In so many games, do you play as the good guy, escaping the bad guy, and there's been a Roadrunner game before in the past, the one from Atari in the arcade, and they had it on Tengen for the NES as well. I actually kind of like that game. I think they made a version of that for the Genesis earlier, now that I think about it. But this game, Desert Demolition, you play as Wile E. Coyote and your Acme products to catch the Roadrunner. And that was a lot of fun for me, because you get to, all the ones from the cartoon, all the silly inventions, like the giant green, like, bat suit, like that weird, like the helmet with the wheel on top. I remember that being a thing. I was like, how is that a thing? How is that supposed to work? Yeah, but it was fun to see the creativity involved, of course, with a game like this. Desert Demolition for the Sega Genesis. Came out in '95. We had The Great Circus Mystery starring Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and maybe you played this on the Super Nintendo. So, and that's one of the great things about these Genesis videos. I did the Super Nintendo videos already too, and you can watch those. So many games that you'll see on this list, they made it for the Genesis and they made it for the Super Nintendo. So if you didn't have a Super Nintendo or you're so pro Genesis or whatever the case may be, it's totally fine. You had multiple ways to play these games, and the Disney games have always been pretty good for the most part, and this is a great game. It's an absolutely wonderful game. I mean, it looks cartoony, it looks like a kid's game, but it's totally not. Anybody can play this game. Still fun today. Still fun today. Mickey or Minnie, and you can pick up the costumes and use those as part of your quest, as part of your game. I think it's a lot of fun. It's definitely worth checking out. One game that Genesis had that Super Nintendo didn't were the Phantasy Star series, and Phantasy Star 4 for the Sega Genesis. My goodness, this game was a beast. It came out, I remember seeing it at Software Etc. at our local mall, and it was like $99.99, $100 for a game for the Genesis, and it came with like a book. Like that was the size of like the case itself, basically. Just like it was just this huge guide and everything. But for people who love the Phantasy Star series, it was great. It's a really fun game. It has that Phantasy Star vibe that you want, that behind the view turn-based RPG, but still also deals with like more sci-fi and more like mechanical, without saying the word mechanical. There's another word I'm thinking of. But almost less. I know the word, it's funny because it also has the word fantasy in it, right? But this one is a different style of fantasy. So it's not like medieval fantasy, but more almost like futuristic space age fantasy. That makes sense. Great soundtrack too, and love the big graphics, love the big sprites of the enemies. It's definitely one. And why haven't they remade the Phantasy Star games yet? We've had like even lots of the Final Fantasy reboots and updates and all that. I would love to see like Phantasy Star at least 1 through 4. Just like they did with the Final Fantasy 1 through 6 or something like that. I'd love to see that. We should make that happen. Somebody should make that happen. I can't. I do not have the power. We had the Punisher. The Punisher, again, another decent side-scrolling beat-em-up. I wish we would get a Punisher game that was a true Punisher game. I'd love to see a Punisher game made today where you can just like walk, not just walking down the street beating up random people, but like with the bad guys, just, you know, taking out their kneecaps, you know. You know, a Punisher game. Come on. It's another beat 'em up. It's fine. Saturday Night Slam Masters. I do like this game a lot. I wish it was more of a wrestling game and less of a fighting game. It's almost like a 3D fighting game. It's not 3D by that standard, but it's the, you know, it's inside of a wrestling ring, but it still plays more like a fighting game than a wrestling game. But you do, it's almost like as if everybody had wrestling moves. It's good. I like it quite a bit. It's just, I was hoping for more of a wrestling game, but it's still great. True Lies came out as well as for the Super Nintendo. On the Super Nintendo, it was LJN, and then on the Sega Genesis, it wasn't. It was Acclaim? Either way, great game, believe it or not. Even though it says LJN on the Super Nintendo version, Acclaim on the Genesis version, it's actually a lot of fun. I do like True Lies. Over the head, where you can like walk around and like shoot guys and stuff like that too. I like the game more than the movie. How about that? Ristar was another one of those games that it came out, you're like, oh, hey, cool. A new Genesis mascot, and there'll be a couple more coming up later on this list too. But Ristar, maybe it's Ristar. I think the Japanese katakana has it say like Listaru or something like that. Whatever. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's a fantastic game. It's a little bit slower pace. It looks a lot like a Sonic the Hedgehog style game, and that's a good thing. Although instead of like running super fast, you just kind of take your time with it and go for a stroll and you move through the game. It's a wonderful game. Such a fun game, and I love the characters, and I wish Ristar would, or maybe it's Ristar, either way. I wish we could come back. You know, we could use another game like that. We'd love to see that as a 3D platformer or something. In the March of 1995, 2 great games came out that same month. On the Super Nintendo side, you got Chrono Trigger. But on the Sega Genesis side, you got Crusader of Sinti. And so many people didn't know about Crusader of Sinti until the last 10 years or so, when they started collecting and they realized, wait, why does this game come with a price tag like it does? Well, it's one of the more pricier games for the Sega Genesis. You should have bought it when you had a chance. Well, we could say that for anything. If anybody knew anything, then, you know, whatever. That's the whole collecting side of it. Never mind that. Crusader of Sinti is such a great game. And the good news is, there's 1,000 ways to play all these games. You do not need to own the actual physical cartridge to play these games. There's EverDrives, there's Misters, there's Raspberry Pis. Crusader of Sinti, isn't that game on the Genesis, like the Switch Online service? Oh, I know it's on the Mini Genesis, the little Mini Genesis, like the little plug-and-play thing. However, you gotta play this game, man. If you love Legend of Zelda, you're gonna love this game. It might be a little bit on the easy side for you, especially if you love Legend of Zelda. But man, Crusader of Sinti, what a great game. We got Road Rash 3 in 1995. I do love the Road Rash series. More of the same. That's all you can ask for. Imagine a game where you're racing and driving down the road, but you could also like punch people and get them off of their, get them out of there and stuff like that. I love it. Love the Road Rash series. Beyond Oasis also came out. That was another game where I could have seen that character, who I think is just Thor, in like the other versions of the game. See that go on to do more bigger things for the Sega Genesis. Beyond Oasis was another one of those kind of overhead Zelda-ish games, I guess, with a jump button, but with bigger sprites. And it just looked colorful and looked fun, and what a great idea. Beyond Oasis, another game that if you're not into Sega Genesis and you've always been pro Nintendo, but you're just now getting into Sega Genesis, look up Beyond Oasis. I think you'll dig that one. Exo Squad just looked visually pleasing once you got into the gameplay. Like, it was based on, I'm sure it was a cartoon for the time. I think I kind of remember that. I remember there was like a toy series at least. I'm pretty sure there's a toy series. My nostalgia gets a little mixed up around the mid 90s between, versus I remember far more. It's funny, I remember far more in the 80s than I do in the 90s, because the 90s, I was going through high school, I was going through Graves' disease, which also comes with brain fog, some memory loss in there too. But I remember Exo Squad being a thing. And I remember playing the game and I had the cartoon cutscenes. I was like, okay, the cartoon cutscene's cool and everything. But then when the gameplay hit, I was like, oh my goodness, this game doesn't even look like a Sega Genesis game. This game looks like an arcade game that happens to be on the Sega Genesis or something like that. It blew me away. And there's two different modes to it too. There's gonna be kind of behind the back flying around shooting stuff. I thought that looked cool. And then the side-scrolling element where you're like walking very slow because you're in your mech suit, and then and shooting the enemies. You have this kind of like, you can aim the arrows or aim the targets, however. I thought that was pretty cool too. I more like the behind the scene, the behind the shoulder, like flying around shooting stuff. And then when you're like the side-scrolling mech stuff, I liked the animation. It was almost like unnecessarily overly animated. Does that make sense? Maybe for a Genesis game. I'm not sure, but Exo Squad certainly looked pretty cool. There's a game called No Escape. Did you rent this one? It was interesting because imagine games like Flashback if it was like way clunkier and still okay-ish enough to play. Perfect rental on this one. That's funny. The first stage of No Escape literally has his people chasing you. There's no escape. It's like you're trying to run away from these guys, and if you eliminate them, they just more and more come anyway. So that's kind of fun. But other than that, the rest of the game, you can run and climb up stuff and punch and kick people, and it's all right. We had Tough Man Contest. I was really excited to see Tough Man Contest because like, oh my god, it's Butterbean. And in the mid-90s, and you might know Butterbean today too, just went through a huge transformation with DDPY through Diamond Dallas Page's program. Butterbean was the cool guy because it was like in a world of like all these great boxers and all these great wrestlers. Here's Butterbean, who looks like the way he does, and his style is punch people in the face and wins. And I was like, dude, this guy was the awesome. Still is. I'm sure he's. I've never met him before in real life, but yeah. So it has Butterbean on the cover. Butterbean's like the final boss of this game. You play the game. It looks a little bit like a Mike Tyson's Punch-Out style of game. You already know it's not going to be like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out because only Mike Tyson's Punch-Out could be Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. But it's not terrible. It's actually not such of a bad game. It's just you have to hit the guy before they hit you, or have the punch and the dodges. It's not boxing. It's a Tough Man Contest, and that's what was cool about the Tough Man Contest. Was like it was less about the martial arts of boxing, and boxing is a martial art, and more about just punching people in the face, and that's what we wanted. That's 90s in a nutshell. That's 90s attitude right there.
Oh, let's get ready to suck it!
The ooze just looked cool. You play as this mutated oozing puddle who's squeezing through things and attacking other enemies too. It just looked fun. It just looked so cool, and it played okay. I wish it played better, but I also didn't know what to expect with a game called The Ooze, other than you play as this puddle of ooze. What more do you need? X-Men 2: The Clone Wars. I loved X-Men. X-Men was one of those games for the Sega Genesis that's like, that's the game. Boy, that's the game right there. X-Men for the Sega Genesis. Now here's X-Men 2. The very first thing you do when you turn it on is you're already into the action. Before a title screen, before a Sega logo, before anything, as soon as you turn it on, you're playing the game. And it just chooses you a random character, whether you're Gambit, whether you're Psylocke. You can play a Psylocke in this one, that's always cool. Whatever the case may be, it's like, congratulations, you're already playing the game. And then once you beat the first level, then you get the title screen. I was like, that's pretty cool. I like stuff like that. I like creativity like that. Ed Annunziata, the guy who did X-Men and X-Men 2, and did other games too, like Shotgun Forever Man. He did Echo the Dolphin, stuff like that too. What a great idea. He's like, oh, let's just go for it. And then they went for it. And it's also a great game. People who have played both, for the most part, I think, I'm more nostalgic for the first one, but for the most part, people do say that the second X-Men game is better than the first one. Light Crusader came out in 1995 for the Sega Genesis, and this is a game that if you haven't played it yet, or even looked at it yet, might be up your alley. I don't know why I got so dramatic with that. Light Crusader is such a fun game. Isometric view, running through the dungeons and stuff like that, slashing your sword, using your magic. Such a great game. It's made by Treasure, if that helps. If the game is made by Treasure, you know you're going to be in for a good time. And that game, Light Crusader for the Sega Genesis, you're going to be in for a good time. As if it was like a Zelda-ish. I hate referring to any run and use your sword and use magic in a Zelda game. But that isometric, super fun game. Visually appeasing too, because of Treasure, and it has some of those animation type things in their games that you don't really see in typical other games and everything. It's pretty cool. It's worth checking out. Doom Troopers, Mutant Chronicle Doom Troopers came out for the Sega Genesis. It's okay. It's a run and gun game, but it's also a very well done run and gun game. So even if you're not familiar, which I wasn't, with the brand, it's a decent run and gun game. It's cool. That's all I'll tell you about it. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. Now, of course, the movie came out. Oh my God, the movie was everywhere. And this was the game based on that. This is another kind of side-scrolling beat 'em up, but hey, you know what? Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. It's actually pretty cool. Another great game that's easy on the eyes is The Adventures of Batman and Robin. And if you played The Adventures of Batman and Robin for the Super Nintendo, this one will be a different experience for you. This is the game that kind of blew me away with what Genesis games were capable of doing, because Super Nintendo really boasted themselves on Mode 7 and scrolling and scaling and all these things. And this game, and there are other games for the Genesis too, but they're like, they can do things like that too. They just have to do them a different way, which makes it, to me, maybe even a little bit more impressive that they can do things like this. It just looks pretty cool. You can play as Batman, you can play as Robin. And I remember just some of the special effects. Like there was a boss, what was it? Like a Pinocchio robot wooden character, something like that. But there's like the way the colors kind of morphed in the background. I thought that was really cool. There's like an Alice in Wonderland stage level something that had a giant like Cheshire cat, I think like robot face they had to battle, and it looks really, really cool. And or even like Mad Hatter's like top hat or something. And the screen starts scrolling and everything like that. It's like, oh my God, this looks fantastic. This would look great on a Super Nintendo, but it's not. It's on the Sega Genesis. And for some reason, to me, that made it stand out even that much more. And at the end of the day, it's a really good game. Well, we couldn't not talk about Comics Zone, Comics with an X, Comics Zone for the Sega Genesis. This game was kind of cool. It was like you play through a comic. Like you're actually literally in a comic, so you have to like go through the barriers of a comic, like to break down the walls onto the next panel and stuff like that. And sometimes the enemies are drawn in as you're fighting through the game and everything too. This game has a higher challenge rate than I would have liked this game to have. I've never beaten this game. It's a lot harder than I would have given it credit for, but such a great looking game, such a fun idea. Comics Zone, that's right, for the Sega Genesis, came out I think like summer of '95. We had Echo Jr., and this was a fun idea. I liked the fact that you could take a game and then give it a kind of kids version of it. Not a lot of people did this. Not a lot of games did this. But we had Echo and then Echo 2, Tides of Time. I don't even know how to say it. I think most of us who played Sega Genesis played those games because we were supposed to. This is the new game to play. And we're like, huh, okay, I get it. And it was just a different experience. And then they're like, oh, here is the kids version of it. That's more about, hey, just find these friends or whatever. It's just, you know, it kind of simplified it a little bit just for kids. And then we still played it too because it was on the Genesis. At least I did. Primal Rage came out that year too. Got another just 2D fighter, but this time with dinosaurs. And also as dinosaurs, there's even like some special moves that were, again, full of 90s attitude. I'll leave it at that. Batman Forever came out in 1995. Boy, this game. I don't want to talk about it.
I have a riddle for you. For me. Really?
Let me talk about Scooby-Doo Mystery. Scooby-Doo Mystery. Scooby-Doo had a bit of a resurgence in '95, didn't it? When did the movie come out? Was it around the same time? Because there was like the cartoon on Cartoon Network or whatever, which has always been in reruns, always been in syndication at the time. There's the Super Nintendo version that was a decent game too, but the one on the Genesis was my favorite of them because the one on the Genesis played like Maniac Mansion, and I do love me some Maniac Mansion. So if you love Maniac Mansion but want to give it that Scooby-Doo vibe, we got it for you with Scooby-Doo on the Sega Genesis. Oh my God, gotta check it out. Vector Man came out on the Sega Genesis in '95. Vector Man was another one of those games. I thought it was going to be a new mascot for Sega, even though they already have Sonic. But it was just, it had those graphics that made everything kind of animate better, just because through simplicity, I suppose. And I remember Vector Man for a couple of reasons. A, I remember playing through it with like a Game Genie, or I used a cheat code or something like that.
Game Genie, I decide how many lives I get.
And at the very end, it was like, hey, congratulations, now try it again without cheating. I was like, man, you got me. The other thing about Vector Man, and maybe if you weren't around during the time, you may not remember this, but Vector Man came with a contest where certain select cartridges, after you beat the game, would give you a phone number to call and then win cash prizes. Like, was it $25,000 or something like that? There was a lot of money to be had with Vector Man, and only on select cartridges though. So there wasn't just like, hey, beat the game, get the phone number, call it in, win your prize. It was like one out of every so many carts. And I don't know if I've ever seen this at conventions as like for the collector scene. They're like, hey, I have like, this is one of the winning cartridges or whatever for Vector Man. I don't know, maybe it doesn't exist. Or maybe again, people just haven't found out or they haven't I don't know. I honestly don't know. But there were certain select cartridges that once you beat the game, you get the phone number, you call it in, and you'd win a prize. And I thought that was really, really cool. It was a lottery system, so you had to play to win. You could also enter to win free of charge because you have to do that when you have a lottery system. But I wonder. I've never thought about that. I should start buying every copy of Vector Man I see at a convention and play through it. Although nowadays I could probably just rip the code and look in the coding to see if it's a winner or not. I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was a great idea. I gotta look into that again. Garfield caught in the act? That's right, Garfield caught in the act. And this is me personally, I've never been the biggest fan of Garfield. It's fine. I liked the Halloween special. I liked the special that had Wolfman Jack where they're praising to the Chrome gods or whatever, and they have to drive the car into the volcano. Fine. Garfield was the thing for the time. But this is actually Garfield aside or not, it's a very good game. It's actually a very good game. It's one of those games where every level is a different theme, where it's like you're going through the TV screen, whatever, however we got in there. But every stage is a different, like one of them is like the scary one, and then there's like an Egyptian stage later, or like a jungle stage or something like that. It's a really good game. Definitely worth checking out. Gargoyles came out both for Disney, the cartoon, as well as for the Sega Genesis. And Gargoyles was such a cool idea. It was a much darker Disney. You think of like Disney, like, was Gargoyles an after-school cartoon? I'm pretty sure Gargoyles came on after school. But it was during a time where it's like, like DuckTales, cute and fun, and Tailspin, and, all the other ones that it's like, oh, they're great. Oh, they're fun. And then here comes Gargoyles, that has like deep lore. It wasn't Disney's version of Batman, right? Because the only thing I can think of is like they had like like the Batman animated series. It was kind of like not that level of darkness, but it had that kind of darkness from Disney of all people at the time. Gargoyles, and the Gargoyles game is also really good too. I'd like, never mind the cartoon and the whatever. I couldn't even tell you the storyline of Gargoyles. Something about they came to New York and they helped the cops. I don't remember. I honestly, I watched it then. Again, I'd have a lot of brain fog and memory loss from this time, from my disease. But Gargoyles was such a great game. And it's I'm just rambling at this point. Let's talk about Spot Goes to Hollywood. Isometric view, top down, looking down on Spot, who's going through and shooting stars for some reason. Was it stars? And then also doing the weird jumping mechanic. Spot was still the 7-Up mascot, and they were still maximizing that mascot by making video games, and people were apparently playing them. I was more of a cool Spot fan. Spot Goes to Hollywood. It was fine. It was worth looking at for a second. VR Troopers came out. VR Troopers, again, another 2D fighting game. This time based on VR Troopers, but it's still just a 2D fighting game. Zoop came out because Zoop came out for everything in 1995. If they were still making NES games during this time, they would have had Zoop for the NES too. I'm sure somebody's already made a homebrew about it. Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Boy, Game Gear, everything else. It was that game. Easy style puzzle game. I like it okay. It's worth checking out for a little bit here and there. We had Earthworm Jim 2. Earthworm Jim 2 came out in 95. I do like the Earthworm Jim series. And this one was, perfect. For me, it was more of the same. I loved Earthworm Jim, the first one. And I was like, okay, good. The comedy is still there. The great soundtrack, the great graphics and animation and comedy is still part of this game too. No complaints for me. Do love me some Earthworm Jim 2. At the end of the year, we had Revolution X, where you play, it's like Aerosmith themed shooting game, came out in the arcade. And interesting to see this on the Sega Genesis when it also came out for the PlayStation 1, because the PlayStation 1 also came out in 1995. So that's the span that we're looking at here. We have like new games for PlayStation and also new games for Sega Genesis. What a span there. Again, I didn't cover every game that came out in 95, but there's a glut of them and more of these videos coming out soon. I've already done these for the Sega Genesis from the previous years, as well as all the years for NES, Super Nintendo. Check out those videos, and more videos are always coming up. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing. We'll see you soon.